The grand ballroom was filled with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of a string quartet playing in the corner. Guests dressed in elegant attire mingled, chatting about the beautiful wedding they were witnessing. Everything was perfect, everything except for Sarah, the bride, who couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. She glanced at the front of the room where her new husband, Daniel, was greeting guests with a broad smile. He was the picture of happiness, the man of her dreams. But Sarah, normally calm and composed, felt an overwhelming sense of panic rising inside her. There was something she couldn't explain, something that didn't feel right. In a secluded corner of the venue, Sarah stood alone, the magnificent white dress she'd dreamed of wearing for years now making her feel more trapped than elegant. Her fingers trembled as she pulled her dress higher, revealing the top of a girl's head. Mia, only 12 years old, her wide, fearful eyes peeking out from underneath, looked like she might cry at any moment. The girl was terrified. "What's going on, Mia?" Sarah whispered urgently, glancing over her shoulder. She could see the bustling party just a few feet away, unaware of the girl's presence under the folds of her dress. I couldn't stay there anymore," Mia whispered back, voice trembling. He said he would hurt me if I left." She glanced nervously toward the entrance of the ballroom, her small hands clutching Sarah's dress as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. Sarah's heart raced. Her mind spun. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but now she found herself tangled in a nightmare that didn't belong to her. Suddenly, the sound of raised voices from the other side of the room pierced the air. Sarah froze, her heart stopping for a moment. The argument was growing louder, more heated. Her worst fear was becoming a reality. She didn't have to see it to know who it was. Mia's stepfather. The door swung open with a loud bang. Standing in the threshold was a tall, broad-shouldered man, Jason. He scanned the room with frantic eyes, his voice raised in a drunken slur. "Where is she? Where's my little girl?" He barked, his gaze sweeping over the guests, unaware of the bride hiding Mia under her dress. Sarah's breath caught in her throat, and she felt an overwhelming sense of panic. This wasn't just a case of an upset parent looking for his child, it was a man who had hurt Mia before. A man who didn't hesitate to lash out when he didn't get what he wanted. Sarah's fingers tightened around the fabric of her gown, her mind racing. She had to do something, and fast. She couldn't just stand there while Mia's life was at risk. The argument was only escalating. Mia's stepfather wasn't the type to back down. He was dangerous. If he found Mia now, at Sarah's wedding, no less, who knew what he'd do? With her heart pounding in her chest, Sarah looked at the frightened girl under her dress. The girl who had trusted her to keep her safe. She was shaking uncontrollably, her eyes wide with terror. Then, Sarah made a decision. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and whispered to Mia, "Stay here. Don't make a sound. No matter what happens." Mia nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude but also fear. Sarah slowly stepped forward, pulling her dress close to her body as if to shield Mia from view. She made her way across the room, her mind racing. The wedding was supposed to be a celebration, but everything had changed in an instant. She reached the center of the ballroom where the commotion was growing louder. Jason was stomping around, demanding to know where Mia was, his voice growing more violent with every passing second. Guests were staring, unsure whether to get involved. Sarah knew that if she didn't act fast, things could spiral out of control. She had to stop Jason from causing a scene, to protect Mia at all costs, even if it meant risking her own safety. But as she neared Jason, she could already feel the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. As if the universe was conspiring against her, the music suddenly stopped. A hush fell over the room, and every eye turned toward Sarah. Sarah froze. The moment of truth had arrived. There was no turning back. "Mia's not here," Sarah said, her voice trembling but firm. Her eyes met Jason's, who was standing in the center of the room, eyes wild with rage. She could feel the heat of his glare. You need to leave. She's not here. Jason's eyes narrowed. What are you talking about, Sarah? I know she's here. I saw her come in earlier. Where is she? I'll make you regret this. He took a step toward her, and Sarah's heart raced even faster. The room seemed to close in on her as Jason moved closer, his anger palpable in the air. For a split second, Sarah considered the consequences of what she was about to do. But there was no time. Mia was depending on her. She took another step forward, her voice now louder, more certain. You need to leave right now. I'm not going to let you hurt her. Not here, not today. The room was silent. Everyone was watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Jason's lips curled into a sinister smile. You think you can protect her? You think you can stop me? You don't know what I'm capable of. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, her resolve hardening. She was afraid, terrified, even. But there was something more important now than her own fear. Mia's safety. And she would do whatever it took to keep her safe. Just as Jason took another step toward her, there was a sudden, sharp voice from behind. Stop right there, Jason. The voice came from a figure entering the ballroom, someone unexpected, someone who could change everything. The door had opened again, and the person who stepped inside wasn't just another guest, it was someone from Mia's past. Someone with the power to turn the entire situation on its head. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just going to be a confrontation anymore. This was about to get even more complicated. Before the chaos of the wedding reception, before Sarah found herself hiding a terrified girl under her dress, everything seemed perfect. It was the kind of day that every woman dreams of, the day she marries the love of her life. For Sarah, it was supposed to be a fairy tale, a celebration of love and new beginnings. She had everything she had ever wanted, a handsome husband, a beautiful venue, and the love of her family and friends. But like all good stories, the calm before the storm was deceiving. The truth was, Sarah had been through a lot to get here, and not everything in her life was as picture-perfect as it seemed. Sarah's story. Sarah and Daniel had been together for nearly 5 years. They met at a mutual friend's party in the city and instantly hit it off. Their connection was effortless, and before long, they were inseparable. Daniel, a well-respected architect, was everything Sarah could have hoped for. He was kind, compassionate, and supported Sarah in every aspect of her life. But it wasn't just her love life that had shaped her into the woman she was today. Sarah had grown up in a small town on the outskirts of the city. Her family wasn't wealthy, but they were loving and tight-knit. Her father, a hard-working mechanic, had always taught her the value of honesty and perseverance. Her mother, a school teacher, instilled in her a passion for learning and helping others. But life wasn't always kind to Sarah. When she was just 18, Sarah's mother fell ill with cancer. It was a battle that lasted years, and in the end, her mother passed away when Sarah was 22. The loss was devastating. It changed Sarah's outlook on life, and she became determined to live her life to the fullest, knowing that time was precious. Daniel had been her rock during those difficult years. He was always there, never questioning her decisions, always patient as she grieved. They got engaged a year ago, and when the time came to plan the wedding, everything seemed to fall into place. Their families were supportive, and the wedding venue was booked, an elegant historic mansion on the edge of town. But despite the picture-perfect wedding plans, there was an undercurrent of unease that Sarah couldn't shake. It wasn't about her relationship with Daniel, but about a phone call she'd received earlier that week, one that had lingered in the back of her mind, gnawing at her. The call, Mia's story. It had been a brief, but unsettling conversation with Mia's mother, Diane. Mia, a 12-year-old girl, was the daughter of Sarah's childhood friend. Diane and Sarah had lost touch after Diane's divorce, but Sarah kept tabs on Mia from a distance, often seeing her around town or at the local grocery store. The call had come out of nowhere. Diane's voice had been shaky, and she seemed to be in a panic. "Sarah, I don't know who else to turn to," she had said. "Mia's been acting strange lately. I've tried everything, but I can't keep her safe from him." Sarah's stomach had dropped at the mention of him. She knew exactly who Diane was referring to, Mia's stepfather, Jason. Jason had come into Mia's life when she was just 8 years old, and Sarah had always been uneasy around him. He was a man who seemed to have a chip on his shoulder, a temper that could flare up at the slightest provocation. While Mia's mother tried to hold their family together, Jason's abusive behavior began to surface. Diane had told Sarah that she was afraid for Mia's safety, but she didn't know what to do. Mia had been trying to escape him for months, but the situation had only worsened. Sarah had promised to keep an eye out, but as the wedding day approached, she had pushed the worry to the back of her mind. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a new chapter in her life. But as she stood in the corner of the reception hall, hiding Mia under her wedding dress, Sarah realized that her worst fear had come true. Mia's world. Mia, a quiet, introverted girl, had been through more than any child should have to endure. After her parents' divorce, Mia had been left in the care of her mother, who was struggling to make ends meet. When Diane remarried Jason, Mia's world turned upside down. Jason wasn't just abusive toward Diane, he had begun to take out his anger on Mia, too. Mia had endured years of neglect, bullying, and fear at the hands of Jason. The scars of his anger were etched into her soul, and she had become afraid to even step outside her own home. But despite everything, Mia had found solace in one person, Sarah. Sarah had always been kind to her when their paths crossed. She'd buy Mia ice cream on hot summer days, ask about her schoolwork, and always make sure she was okay. Mia had grown to trust Sarah, though she had never shared the full extent of her trauma. But as the years went on and Mia's fear of her stepfather deepened, she knew she couldn't stay with him any longer. The night of Sarah's wedding, Mia had reached her breaking point. She had run away from home, knowing she needed to find somewhere safe. When she heard the music from the wedding reception, she had made her way there, hoping against hope that Sarah would help her. But now, as she crouched beneath Sarah's dress, hiding from the angry man searching for her, Mia wondered if she had made the right decision. She was terrified, not just of Jason, but of the consequences of her actions. What if Jason found her? What if Sarah's life was ruined because of her? In that moment, Mia realized that she wasn't just hiding under a bride's dress, she was hiding from a lifetime of fear. The secret comes to light. As the minutes ticked by and the argument grew louder, Sarah tried to stay calm. But the tension in the room was palpable. The guests, still enjoying their champagne and hors d'oeuvres, had no idea that a life-or-death struggle was unfolding just beyond their sight. Sarah knew Jason's temper well enough to understand that this wasn't just about finding his stepdaughter, it was about asserting control, about making Mia feel powerless and small. And she wasn't going to let him do that. Not on her watch. Sarah turned to Mia, her heart heavy with the weight of the decision she was about to make. "You stay here. You're safe with me," she whispered. "No matter what happens next, I won't let him hurt you. I promise." Mia nodded, her tear-filled eyes reflecting both fear and relief. For the first time in a long while, she felt like someone cared about her, that someone would protect her. But as the door to the ballroom opened and Jason's footsteps grew louder, Sarah realized that protecting Mia wasn't going to be as simple as just hiding her under a dress. It was time to face the music. The atmosphere in the ballroom had shifted. Laughter, music, and clinking glasses that once filled the air were now drowned out by a sudden tension that crawled through every corner of the room. It wasn't a slow build-up, but rather a shift in energy that everyone could feel. even if they didn't know exactly what was happening. Sarah's heart raced as she crouched, her hands desperately clutching the folds of her wedding dress, trying to keep the girl beneath her hidden. Mia's breath was shallow, barely audible as she shivered, both from fear and from the cold that had started creeping into her bones. "Please, don't let him find me," Mia whispered, her voice trembling like a leaf caught in the wind. Sarah could hear the desperation, the plea for safety in her tone. "I won't let him hurt you, Mia. I promise," Sarah whispered back, trying to sound calm, though her own nerves were threatening to overwhelm her. As she gently patted Mia's shoulder, she could feel the girl's fear seep through her skin, her breath hitching in silent sobs. Sarah wanted to hold her, comfort her, but she knew that now wasn't the time. They had to stay hidden. They had to stay quiet. Meanwhile, just outside the door, Sarah could hear Jason's angry voice calling out. It was a low growl at first, just loud enough to carry through the walls, but it quickly escalated into something much worse. "Where is she?" Jason's voice barked, the kind of voice that was a mixture of anger and panic, something that sent a shiver down anyone's spine. "She can't have gone far. I swear I'll find her, and when I do." Sarah flinched at the sound. She had heard that tone before, years ago, when Jason's temper would snap at the smallest provocations. That voice was a warning, a signal of a man who had no boundaries when it came to inflicting pain, both emotional and physical. The music from the reception hall continued to play, oblivious to the escalating crisis just outside. The wedding guests were blissfully unaware of the storm brewing. They didn't know that Sarah's perfect day had come to a screeching halt, that her dream wedding had turned into a battle for survival. But Sarah wasn't about to let Mia face Jason alone, not while she could still stand between them. She pressed her back to the wall, forcing herself to remain still, to not make a sound. Every moment felt like an eternity. The confrontation, Jason finds the door. The minutes passed like hours, but eventually, Jason's footsteps grew louder, drawing closer to the ballroom. It was clear he wasn't going to stop until he had found Mia. His anger was unmistakable, and Sarah knew that if he entered the room, all her efforts would be for nothing. "Where is she, damn it?" Jason's voice came again, sharper now. He was right outside the door. Sarah's pulse quickened. She couldn't think. She couldn't act fast enough. The door was barely cracked open, just enough for Jason to see the reflection of the guests, the chatter, the dance floor. But he wouldn't be fooled. He'd know if Mia was inside, hiding among the crowd. She had to stop him. She had to buy them time. Mia's hand squeezed Sarah's gently, the trembling girl seeking reassurance she wasn't sure she could offer. Sarah took a deep breath. There was no more waiting, no more hiding. They had to act now. Without thinking, Sarah stood tall, her wedding dress billowing out in a dramatic swirl, and she marched toward the door. "Mia," she said softly, just loud enough for the girl to hear. "Stay behind me. Don't make a sound. Just trust me." Mia nodded, though her eyes were wide with terror. She had no idea what Sarah was about to do, but in that moment, she trusted her completely. As Sarah reached the door, she cracked it open just enough to peer through the gap. Her heart slammed in her chest as she locked eyes with Jason, his furious face just inches away. His hands were balled into fists, his knuckles white with rage. His eyes searched the room, scanning every inch for his stepdaughter. "Is everything okay in here, Sarah?" Jason's voice was deceptively calm, the kind of calm that always preceded an outburst. He wasn't asking. He was demanding. Sarah's mind raced, but she had to remain steady. She took a deep breath, forcing a smile as she stepped into view. "Jason, of course. Everything's fine. We're just celebrating," she said with forced cheer, trying to buy them more time, hoping to keep him distracted just long enough for Mia to stay hidden. Jason's eyes flicked briefly over her shoulder, a spark of suspicion flickering in his gaze. Celebrating? Or hiding? He tilted his head, his lips curling into a sinister smirk. He wasn't fooled for a second. Sarah's heart sank. He knew. He knew something was off. "Jason, you're scaring the guests," Sarah said, trying to sound authoritative, despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Why don't you step outside? Take a breather. We'll talk later." Jason took a step closer, his breath hot on her face. "Later? Later isn't going to work, Sarah. I'm not leaving until I find her. You can't protect her from me forever." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. He was dangerous, Sarah had always known that. But now, with her wedding day turned into a nightmare, the reality of the situation was staring her in the face. Mia was still hidden under the dress, shaking, but Sarah knew she couldn't keep this up much longer. Jason would find her. The only way to protect Mia now was to confront him head-on. She steadied herself, mentally preparing for what would come next. "I'm not protecting anyone from you," Sarah said firmly, looking Jason straight in the eye. "But you're not going to hurt her." Jason's gaze darkened, his posture stiffening with menace. "Get out of my way, Sarah," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. This wasn't going to end quietly. The unthinkable twist, a sudden intervention. Just as Jason took another step toward Sarah, a new voice rang out from across the room. "Stop!" Everyone turned, confused and startled, as a tall figure emerged from the crowd, an officer in uniform, badge gleaming under the lights. The tension in the room shifted again, this time toward confusion. "Jason Miller, you're under arrest," the officer said calmly, his hand extending toward Jason. Sarah blinked in disbelief. She had no idea who the officer was or how he had gotten there, but she wasn't going to question it. She stepped back quickly, her heart pounding, as Jason's anger surged to the surface. "What the hell is this?" Jason shouted, stepping back, his fists clenched. "You can't arrest me. I haven't done anything wrong." "You're being arrested for domestic violence and stalking," the officer replied coolly. "We've been tracking your behavior for months. Your wife and stepdaughter have filed reports." Jason froze. His face turned red with rage and humiliation, but he didn't move. He was trapped. For the first time, Sarah saw something else in Jason's eyes, fear. The room was frozen. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Jason stood still, the shock of the officer's sudden appearance washing over him like a cold wave. For a split second, he didn't move, his fury locked in place as he processed what was happening. Sarah's breath came in shallow bursts as she stood just a few feet away, still clutching her wedding dress, trying to hold back the rush of relief that threatened to spill over. Mia remained hidden under the fabric, her wide eyes peeking out just slightly, watching the scene unfold. Sarah wanted nothing more than to pull her into a comforting embrace, to tell her that they were safe, that this nightmare was finally over. But Jason wasn't ready to back down. Domestic violence? Jason sneered, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me. You can't arrest me for something that didn't happen." He moved forward with a sudden, dangerous step, trying to intimidate the officer, his fingers twitching with the urge to lash out. The officer stood firm, unflinching. "We have multiple reports, Jason. From your wife, from your stepdaughter. We've been investigating for months. This isn't just about tonight. It's about everything you've been doing." His voice was steady, professional, but there was an edge to it now, one that suggested he'd dealt with people like Jason before. People who used their power and rage to control others. Jason's eyes flicked from the officer to Sarah, his gaze now full of venom. You've been planning this, haven't you?" His eyes narrowed. "You've been waiting for this moment." Sarah didn't know how to respond. The only thing she knew for certain was that she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him, not of what he could do. Jason had ruled their lives for too long, and the idea of him using his power to destroy more lives, especially Mia's, was too much for her to bear. Before she could speak, Jason exploded. "Enough of this," he shouted, his hand reaching for the small knife tucked inside his jacket pocket. He pulled it out in one fluid motion, holding it up threateningly toward the officer. The air in the room seemed to still, every person in the vicinity aware of the danger. Sarah's heart stopped, her eyes locked on the blade glinting under the ballroom lights. But the officer was faster. In one swift motion, he raised his hand and aimed a taser at Jason's chest, pulling the trigger before Jason could react. The sound of the taser firing broke through the tension like a thunderclap. Jason's body jerked violently, his hand releasing the knife as he staggered back. His knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor with a harsh thud, his body twitching as the electricity coursed through him. For a moment, everything was silent. Sarah didn't know whether to breathe a sigh of relief or to scream. The sudden drop from pure terror to stunned disbelief left her feeling numb. The officer quickly moved forward, securing Jason with handcuffs, while two other officers appeared seemingly out of nowhere, ensuring that he didn't get any ideas about escaping. His eyes, wide and furious, met Sarah's for a brief moment before he was pulled away, his curses echoing as he was escorted out of the ballroom. But Sarah didn't pay attention to him anymore. Her attention shifted immediately back to Mia, who had been silently watching the entire exchange, her body still trembling under the layers of Sarah's dress. Is he gone?" Mia asked in a whisper, barely able to keep her voice steady. Sarah knelt down beside her, lifting the dress to finally reveal Mia's tear-streaked face. "Yes, sweetheart," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from Mia's forehead. "He's gone. You're safe now." Mia broke into quiet sobs, her body shaking with relief. The weight of the fear she had been carrying for so long was now gone. It wasn't just the physical presence of Jason that had been the source of her terror, it was the constant anxiety of living in a world where the person who should have been protecting her had been her greatest danger. But now, that nightmare was over. Mia was free. Sarah hugged her tightly, unable to hold back the tears of her own. For the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah allowed herself to feel something other than fear. She allowed herself to feel the kind of peace that came with knowing that they had survived. The fallout, immediate consequences. The aftermath of Jason's arrest left the room in a stunned silence. The wedding guests, who had no idea what had transpired in the hours leading up to this moment, now stood in a huddle, whispering among themselves, trying to piece together the chaos that had just unfolded before their eyes. Some of them were shocked, others uncomfortable, but none of them seemed to know how to respond. It wasn't the kind of situation you could easily address. People had been laughing, dancing, toasting to a happy couple just moments ago. And now, they were witnessing the sudden and violent unmasking of the darkness lurking in someone they had once considered part of their social circle. Sarah stood up slowly, her hand still shaking as she wiped her tears. She wasn't sure what to do next, whether to walk out of the room or stay and face the crowd. But before she could make a decision, Mia's voice broke through her thoughts. "Is it really over?" Mia asked, her face still pale but her expression softer now. Sarah nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "Yes. It's over. We're going to be okay." But even as she said the words, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Jason's arrest had been just the beginning, not the end. The emotional aftermath of everything they had been through, the years of fear, the quiet suffering, the constant threat, would linger far longer than any physical consequences. Mia wasn't just going to forget this night. Sarah wasn't going to either. The community they had once thought they knew would never be the same either. The truth had been exposed, and there was no going back. But that didn't mean the story was over. Reflection, a question of the future. The following days were filled with interviews, legal proceedings, and the slow process of rebuilding. Jason remained in custody, charged with several counts related to domestic violence, stalking, and even attempted assault for the confrontation at the wedding. But Sarah and Mia both knew that the emotional scars would take far longer to heal. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Mia worked to create a new life for themselves, one that was free from the shadows of Jason's control. Sarah had learned the hard way that the perfect life she had envisioned, a dream wedding, a happy family, could quickly turn into a nightmare. But she had also learned something far more valuable: the strength to protect those she loved, the courage to face the truth, and the power to fight back. The community was left to pick up the pieces as well. People who had once supported Jason were forced to confront the truth of his actions, and for many, it was a wake-up call to examine their own relationships and the toxic people they may have been enabling. As Sarah stood with Mia, looking out over a world that felt both uncertain and full of potential, she asked herself, how many others are out there, living in fear, too afraid to ask for help? It was a question that she couldn't shake. And it was one that would haunt her for a long time, driving her to help those who needed it most. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of peace. Because she knew that, no matter what came next, she would never stop fighting for her family. The future was theirs to shape. Together. In the days following Jason's arrest, the shockwaves reverberated through their tight-knit community. What had begun as a grand celebration, Sarah and Jason's wedding, quickly unraveled into a night of revelations and terror. The events were far from over. As the news of the arrest spread, people began to question what had really been happening behind closed doors, where they hadn't known about the fear and abuse that had been silently escalating. For Sarah and Mia, the immediate aftermath was a blur. The wedding was, in essence, over. The guests who had been partying in blissful ignorance now had the uncomfortable task of reconciling the shocking reality that someone they had known was capable of such cruelty. Whispers filled the air, gossip spread, and judgment ran rampant. Sarah's phone rang incessantly, filled with calls from concerned friends, family, and even distant acquaintances. Everyone wanted answers, but Sarah wasn't ready to talk just yet. Instead, she focused on Mia, on making sure that she was okay, on helping her feel safe again. Mia had been through hell in silence for so long that, even now, she didn't know how to let go of the fear that had shaped her childhood. She had spent years thinking that the violence she'd witnessed, the threats she'd heard, were somehow her fault. Now that Jason was behind bars, the question lingered: would it all go away? Could Mia ever escape the shadow he had cast on her life? Sarah didn't have all the answers, but she was determined to provide her daughter with the support she needed. She kept their conversations open and honest, making sure Mia knew she wasn't alone anymore. The repercussions in the community. As the dust began to settle, the community started to grapple with the reality of what had unfolded. People who had once been blind to Jason's controlling nature were forced to reckon with their complicity. Neighbors who had seen Sarah and Mia's strained smiles now realized the dark truth they had been too willing to overlook. While some rallied to support Sarah and Mia, others turned a blind eye, unsure of how to respond to the truth. The couple who had thrown a lavish wedding celebration now had to live with the knowledge that the man they had so eagerly welcomed into their circle was capable of destroying lives. The awkward tension between Sarah and the wedding guests who were now aware of the abuse was palpable. In the weeks that followed, there were meetings, town hall discussions, and debates about domestic violence. People began to talk about what they had seen or ignored for too long. Slowly, a shift in the community's awareness began to take place. Jason's arrest had opened up conversations about domestic abuse, control, and the silence that perpetuates it. However, while the community was grappling with its newfound knowledge, Sarah and Mia remained in the quiet aftermath of it all, facing the more personal consequences of their own survival. The pain from Jason's years of manipulation and abuse had left scars that would take time to heal. The legal battle and struggles ahead. Jason's arrest, while a victory in many ways, was only the beginning of what Sarah and Mia would face. The legal proceedings stretched on for months, as Sarah was forced to relive painful memories during depositions and interviews. She gave testimony after testimony, sharing the truth of Jason's abusive behavior, how he had belittled her, isolated her, and controlled every aspect of their lives. It wasn't just physical violence that had affected her, it was the emotional scars, the manipulation, and the constant fear. But even more difficult for Sarah was the toll it took on Mia. Although Mia was no longer living under the same roof as Jason, the psychological damage was more complex. Therapy sessions became a necessary part of Mia's healing process, but there were days when it felt like there would never be enough hours or words to undo the years of trauma. Jason was charged with several counts, including assault, coercion, and stalking. As the case moved through the court system, the evidence stacked against him was overwhelming. Sarah was forced to confront the memories she had tried to bury, and it was often difficult to be reminded of the man she had once loved, a man who had slowly eroded her sense of self-worth. Despite the emotional toll, Sarah knew that each step forward, no matter how painful, was necessary. For her, for Mia, and for anyone else who had suffered in silence. The case was finally brought to trial, and Jason was convicted on several charges, including domestic violence and coercion. He was sentenced to several years in prison. Though the legal victory was a relief, it wasn't the end. Healing, both emotional and psychological, was a long journey, one that would take time and patience. But it was a start. Reflection, the impact on their lives and the community. Sarah and Mia's world had been irrevocably altered by the events that unfolded that fateful evening. The physical scars might have been healing, but the emotional damage would take longer to mend. But even in the face of this ongoing struggle, both mother and daughter found strength they never knew they had. They began to rebuild their lives, one step at a time. They moved to a new home, away from the haunting memories of Jason, and started to create a fresh sense of normalcy. For Sarah, this meant focusing on her own healing and rediscovering her self-worth. She had spent so many years in the shadow of fear and shame that, for the first time in ages, she allowed herself to think about what she wanted, what she deserved. The freedom to make those choices was like a breath of fresh air. Mia, too, was rebuilding, learning to trust again and slowly moving past the traumatic grip Jason had held over her. She had her days, of course, moments when the weight of what had happened would come rushing back, but with Sarah by her side, she was learning to take it one day at a time. Therapy helped, and the support of friends and community members gave them the courage to keep going. Their healing wasn't linear. Some days felt like setbacks, and others felt like milestones. But through it all, they were together. They had made it through the darkest days, and that was what mattered. As for the community, the wake-up call had been jarring. Conversations about abuse, about domestic violence and the insidious ways it can creep into relationships, were no longer as taboo. People began to realize how often they ignored the signs of abuse and how many others might be silently suffering. The stigma was slowly starting to break down, and more people came forward, sharing their own experiences of surviving toxic relationships. Sarah and Mia's journey was just one piece of a much larger picture. It was a painful chapter, but it was also a catalyst for change. And as Sarah stood in the quiet of her new home, looking out over a future she once thought was impossible, she realized that even in the aftermath of horror, there could be hope. As Sarah and Mia looked toward the future, the echo of the past still lingered. The weight of the trauma they had endured wasn't something that could simply vanish with the conviction of Jason, but it was a beginning, a crucial step forward in their journey. This final part of their story would not be about retribution or revenge but about healing and discovering a new life, one that was free from fear, free from the past. The power of healing. Sarah had often heard people talk about healing, about how time heals all wounds. But she had never really believed it. Time hadn't healed her marriage, hadn't stopped Jason's cruelty from taking its toll on her. But now, with time and with the support of her daughter, she was beginning to see that healing didn't mean forgetting. Healing meant reclaiming a sense of self, finding strength in vulnerability, and daring to hope again. The first step was addressing her emotional wounds head-on. Therapy became a regular part of Sarah's routine. It was here, in the quiet of a therapist's office, that she began to untangle the web of self-doubt and shame Jason had woven around her. She had spent so many years thinking that she wasn't enough, that the abuse was somehow her fault. But with every session, she was beginning to shed those misconceptions. It wasn't easy. Every breakthrough felt hard-earned. Yet, Sarah found strength in acknowledging the pain, in giving herself permission to grieve, and in understanding that her worth had never been tied to Jason's opinion of her. Slowly, she allowed herself to feel joy again, not as a woman defined by her past but as a woman capable of moving forward. Mia's healing was a slower process, and it was made more complex by the fact that she had been traumatized at such a young age. But Sarah watched with pride as Mia gradually became more independent, more confident, and more herself. Therapy, too, became a vital part of Mia's life, giving her a safe space to explore her emotions and face the trauma that had haunted her. Mia's first major milestone came when she spoke openly to Sarah about her experiences and the emotions she had buried for years. It was a breakthrough, a moment of deep connection and understanding between mother and daughter. It wasn't a perfect moment, and it didn't erase the scars, but it was a new beginning. A new chapter, forging a future of empowerment. With the conviction of Jason behind them, Sarah and Mia knew they had the opportunity to redefine their futures. No longer bound by fear, they took steps to regain control over their lives. Sarah went back to work, using her professional skills to reintegrate herself into her career. For years, she had sacrificed her ambitions, allowing herself to fade into the background. But now, empowered by her own journey, she took charge of her future, pursuing a path that excited her, that gave her a sense of purpose again. Mia, on the other hand, used the experience to fuel her passion for helping others. She became actively involved in advocacy work for survivors of domestic violence, speaking at local events, and raising awareness in her community. Her journey from victim to advocate was nothing short of inspiring. The trauma she had faced now became her strength, and she used her voice to empower others who felt they had no one to turn to. The two of them made it a point to stay involved in the changes occurring within their community. They attended town hall meetings, joined support groups, and worked with local organizations dedicated to ending domestic violence. They knew that their journey could inspire others to speak out, to stand up, and to demand a life free from abuse. The ripple effect, changing the community. The change in Sarah and Mia didn't just affect them. Their courage to speak out, to heal, and to rebuild their lives had created a ripple effect within the community. Where once there was silence about domestic abuse, now there were conversations. People began to open their eyes to the realities of abuse, to see the signs in their own homes and in the lives of those around them. Local support centers reported an increase in people reaching out for help. Domestic violence became a topic that was no longer swept under the rug. Schools began offering programs that taught young people about healthy relationships, emotional well-being, and how to recognize the signs of manipulation and abuse. Sarah and Mia, along with other survivors, played a crucial role in this transformation. Their voices, their bravery, and their willingness to share their story had created a movement that went far beyond their own healing. They had sparked a shift in the community's mindset, encouraging others to stand up and speak out about their own experiences. The unexpected twist, Jason's redemption. Just when it seemed like the story of Sarah and Mia had found its conclusion, an unexpected twist emerged. Jason, while incarcerated, began to reach out, not to the media, not to his family, but to Sarah and Mia. In a series of letters, he confessed to the horrors he had inflicted on them, but his words were not the typical apologies that came from a place of guilt. Instead, they were full of self-reflection and, surprisingly, remorse. Jason claimed that he had sought help in prison, undergoing therapy and realizing the extent of his abuse. He acknowledged the damage he had caused not only to Sarah and Mia but also to himself. It was an unsettling twist, one that left Sarah and Mia torn between the pain of their past and the potential for closure in the form of forgiveness. Though the letters were never shared directly with the public, they were read in private by Sarah and Mia. The emotions they stirred were complex. Sarah, for one, wasn't sure if forgiveness was possible, or if it would even help her. But what the letters did offer was something Sarah had struggled to find all along: closure. Jason's acknowledgement of his wrongdoings, while not enough to heal the past, at least allowed Sarah to begin to let go of the anger that had consumed her for years. For Mia, it was a different experience. She wasn't ready to accept Jason's apology. She had already learned that forgiveness could not be rushed. But it did make her think deeply about her own healing process, about the importance of letting go of the hatred that could still hold her back. In the end, Jason's letters were an unexpected part of their story, offering a glimpse into the complexities of human nature, redemption, and the way healing unfolds in unpredictable ways. The final thought: a future without fear. Sarah and Mia's journey wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't a story where the villain was easily defeated and everything ended in perfect happiness. Their lives were forever changed by Jason's cruelty, but the lessons they had learned, the strength they had found, and the people they had become were the true victory. As they moved forward, side by side, they found peace in knowing they had reclaimed their power. They had chosen hope over fear, love over hate, and self-respect over submission. And that was more than enough. But for the community, the ultimate question remained: how many more lives were out there, hidden in plain sight, suffering in silence? How many others were afraid to speak up? And how could each of them help make a difference? As Sarah and Mia looked toward the horizon, they realized that their story was just one of many, and that the journey of healing, redemption, and growth was a long one for everyone who had suffered. It was up to all of them to ensure that no one ever felt alone in the battle against abuse.